So one of my indelible images of my childhood is watching my mother with a pen in her mouth, sitting at the roll-top desk in our living room, reconciling her checkbook, and her religiously going through the Sunday paper at the dining room table in the kitchen, cutting out coupons for the next trip to the grocery store. And with her standing there proud at the checkout in the grocery store as she handed over sheets of green stamps to pay for the food which we had just purchased there. Enough food, by the way, which was going to keep us going for 2 weeks. Who goes to the grocery store for 2 weeks worth of food? There was so much that we would lug away, and she would meticulously make sure she did not give one more green stamp than what the person needed to pay for the food, that she was very careful to cut them all out. And we would be going down the cereal aisle, and my sisters and I, we would want Fruity Pebbles or Count Chocula. And my mother would say, "No, we don't have a coupon for that." And so it would be grape nuts for us, which isn't half bad if you pour enough sugar on them. But my mother was a miracle worker. She could divide $1 and come up with a whole host of food for us. And of course, when I was a child, when I was Ray Ray's age, I did not realize back then just how hard that miracle was to pull off. Nor did I realize the assistance that we were getting from the government, our neighbors, through their taxes, helping us to have enough food on our table through what was called green stamps, is now called EBT, or the electronic benefit transfer. And you no longer have the sheet of green stamps that you cut out and give. Instead, the EBT has a card. It's used very much like a debit or a credit card. You just swipe it. Thank goodness for that. It is so much less of a source of shame for many people who are on EBT and government assistance, which is one reason why I'm always so proud of thinking of my mom, how she stood there just defiant as she tore those little green stamps and gave them to the counter. And I remember very clearly all of these things, as I bet many of the people who were sitting on that hillside were thinking about, and how many of you either experience such things in your own lives today or have experienced them in your past. Many of you have the experience of sitting at your roll-top desk, agonizing over reconciling your checkbook, and having to say no to your child who wants Count Chocula because there isn't a coupon for that. Which probably is a good thing, because come on, I mean, Fruity Pebbles and Count Chocula aren't really that good for you anyway. Or maybe you're doing that now, experiencing this agonizing reality as you think about your retirement. Is there enough money in the account in the retirement to last you as long as you think you might live? Or maybe you have a child or two in college or about to be in college, and you're thinking about and stressing over college tuition and whether or not there is enough to pay for their school. It's times like these that I think it's natural for us to want to protect the little that we have left, that we want to safeguard what we have, and probably the last thing in the world that we think about that we can do, even if we really wanted to, is share the little bit that we have with others. And that, the people who came to see Jesus that day knew what this was like. They'd come to hear him preach. They came to be healed. They came. For whatever reason, they came. And they had been there for a long time, our story tells us. They were tired. They were hungry. The sun was going down. The disciples were starting to get worried because they weren't going away. They were looking out at them, about 5,000 of them in all. And they went to Jesus, because they were tired and probably hungry, and you can hear it in their voice in the story that they are so overdoing this ministry thing for this day. Jesus, tell them to go away. But instead, Jesus tells the disciples, you feed them. And they were like, Jesus? Where are we going to get enough money to pay for all this bread that you want to give them? And even if we had the money, come on, man, we're tired. And they probably thought he was out of his mind. One of the disciples says, Jesus, it would take the equivalent of 6 months' wages to feed all of these people on this hill. We can't feed them. And Jesus says to them, go check your bags and tell me what you have. And they come back and they say, we've got 5 loaves and 2 fish. That's not going to touch this problem. And Jesus says, I can work with that. And he has the people sit down in groups of 50 or 100, and he gets the bread and he gets the fish, and he gives thanks to God for these beautiful gifts that they have, and he starts to pass them out to all of the people that are there on the hillside, and there's plenty left. 12 baskets full, more than they even had when they started. 12. That's a pretty important number in the Bible if you haven't kind of figured that out. And the feeding of the 5,000 is one of those miracles that we hear about a lot. And it was so important to the early church. In fact, the earliest churches used as an iconography, as a symbol, the loaf and the fish as a symbol that you had entered into a Christian community. Well before the cross became the universal symbol of the church, the loaves and the fish were the symbols that people recognized, that they knew that they were in a Christian community. It was so important to the early church, and it ought to be important to us now. And it defies comprehension, and it calls on us to believe in something inexplicable had happened. And of course, many through the centuries have done what we've all tried to do when we come across something that's inexplicable. We try to explain it. There are so many who say that on that hill that day, there weren't just 5 loaves and 2 fish. Instead, Jesus started passing out 5 loaves and 2 fish and sharing them with the crowd. And once he started doing that, then other people started watching what he was doing. And so they got brave as well, went into their bags, opened their bags up, pulled the food out that they had, and started sharing it with the other people on the hill as well. And then more and more and more people did that, realizing that it was not only okay, but it was going to be fun, it was going to be a party, and then more, and finally there was enough for everybody. Now, I would argue first, that's not so much explaining a miracle away. That is in and of itself a miracle. Because in a time of scarcity and fear that you might not have enough, to be able to say, I'm going to share even the little bit that I have with others is miraculous. And Jesus did that. He opened people's hearts, got them to push through any of that fear, and people were fed, which is so important. Oh my goodness, there's almost nothing more important than having someone with a full belly. Now, we could end the story there. And in many ways, that would be good enough, miraculous enough. But there's more. Because I personally believe that people opened their bags that day. I do believe that they dared enough to share what they had, but I also believe that there was a greater miracle going on. I believe Christ really did turn a little into a lot, and that those 5 loaves and 2 fish would have stretched out to feed the masses had no one else come through. And I think there's a tendency for those of us in traditions like ours, the United Church of Christ, where intellect is so valued and important that we love digging into the weeds and trying to reconcile the Bible with our common sense and scientific understandings of how the world works, and we try to explain the miracle away. We try to look for plausible explanations for what happened, and we point to the miracles as lessons of right behavior rather than evidence of who Christ was and who Christ continues to be for us. Not that that explanation and that trying to think of things and try to really dive into things is not important. It's valuable. It's so important. It helps us understand who God is and Christ is and the mission on which we have been called. But also equally important is that we don't lose the mystery of our faith. It's important that we not dismiss the inexplicable. It's important that we not forget that Christ was not just a good man, a prophet, a teacher, a healer, but he was Emmanuel, God with us, the incarnate Word made flesh that dwelt among us to transform us all. And what happened that day on that hill was not just an example of that idea, to use a line from one of the posters I remember from second grade, that sharing is caring. It's more than that. It's Jesus doing the inexplicable, the unexpected, to inspire hope in people. It was Jesus inspiring us to open our hearts and to remove that pride that keeps us from accepting help from others and an apathy that prevents us from serving one another. And in the face of such hope and trust, we can't help but respond, right? And the good news is, when we do, Christ blesses what we share and what we're given, and we have enough. For the longest time in my life, I lived as a cynic. And let me tell you something about being a cynic. It is exhausting and soul depriving and can lead to an ulcer. I know what it is to think that there will never be enough, that it won't make a difference, and that it's not even worth trying. And that's a horrible way to live. And it's pretty uninspiring. And the things that we hold on to and the fear that we live into often becomes useless and unappealing to others. And I know what it is to live life as an optimist. Not just as a Pollyannish, rose-colored glasses, everything's going to be all right, but to truly live into a faith and a trust. To live into an optimism, to live into hope, to live into faith and trust, which becomes easier and easier to believe when we don't have to shoulder that burden all by ourselves. It becomes easier when we believe that Christ can take the little that we have or the little that we've been given, and maybe as little as 5 loaves and 2 fish, and transform it into a feast to feed the multitudes. And it comes easier when we know that the one who sees that change will be changed themselves. One of my favorite churches in all of greater Fort Worth, Texas, is Bethel Baptist Church on Vickery Road. It is a small church. 40 to 50 people on any given Sunday, mostly full of septa and octogenarians. When I visited that Sunday, the young man of 56 became the second youngest person in the church that day. And we would look at Bethel Baptist Church with their rundown carpet and the tears and the holes in the pews, and we would probably call it something pejorative like quaint. The pastor was a 1/4-time pastor who also worked as a bail bondsman and did some electrical work on the side to make ends meet. And I found the church through my buddy Eric, who volunteered there on Thursdays when Bethel Baptist Church did a free lunch to any and all. Every Thursday, without fail, they brought tables into that sanctuary because they really only had the one room kind of big enough to fill people, or to fill places. And they would bring those type of like metal chairs that fold down that's in the closet in Lander Hall, which we will never bring out again. And they set up 80 of them, and the place got full up. And it was run by this amazing woman who, for the life of me, I've been so struggling to remember her name, but I can't, but I see her face as clear as day. She had been a lunch lady for her entire professional life at a middle school. And she said, I've been feeding God's little children, no matter their age, my entire life, either around the table in my home, the table at my school, or the table at my church. It's what God gave me to give, food. But what made this place so unique, listen to this, Kensington Community Church. What made this place so unique was it was run 100% by volunteers, and the food that was purchased and then made and given was purchased with 100% donations. Not a single dime came from their budget. They had no budget. And this woman whose face I can remember but whose name escapes me says that every day the Lord gives us our daily bread and then takes that bread and breaks it and breaks it and breaks it until there is a feast for everyone and everyone is fed. We just have to live into the faith, trusting and hoping in Christ that God will provide. I'm not saying that we should all quit our day jobs, remove the pews, bring tables in here, and set up the cushiony chairs, not those metal things. We're never bringing those out again. And all of a sudden start a soul food kitchen here in our sanctuary so that we can live into this faith and this trust. What I am saying is that all of us have something inside of us that hope can transform. We all have enough time and talent and treasure to give one way or another that Christ can work with and do incredible, inexplicable things with. But we must not let fear and scarcity and the falsehood of not having enough hold us back. We must live into the faith of those who came to the hillside that day, into the faith of that wonderful woman whose name escapes me this morning. The kind of faith that brings 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread to Christ Jesus and say, use this. It's the type of faith that can end up transforming everything. And that, sisters and brothers, is pretty miraculous, no matter how hard we try to understand it. Amen and amen.